Good afternoon. Today we shall discuss the conclusion of Aphra Behn's play, The Rover. Now, before we go into the play as such, let us assess how do comedies generally conclude and what are the expectations that the audience has with regard to the conclusion of a comedy. Now, endings of comedies tell us a lot about how the dramatist wants us to understand the play's events, conflicts, and debates. If all ends are tied up, all characters happy participants in a celebratory closure, and all discords are resolved, the ending produces a feeling of completion as well as inclusion. We are presented with an image of a cohesive, festive society. If, on the other hand, loose ends are left unexplained, characters are left outside the social festivity, or discordant notes are sounded occasionally, if not regularly, and the audience is left critical of the festive and inclusive images, we can call the later comedy as satiric and the earlier one as romantic. But these are very broad, non-specific categorizations, and very often characteristics of one type of a comedy, as it were, easily walks into the other. In this context, let us now consider Aphra Behn's ending in The Rover. If we consider the lines 492 to the end of the play, line 573 of Act 5, Scene 1 of The Rover as the play's concluding drift, what are the points of significance that we get from the concluding drift of the play? Much of the action only makes sense when read as the culmination of the intrigues and actions of the whole Act 5, which opened with Blunt's imprisonment of Florinda and the competition between the male characters to possess her. Angelica has threatened the comic and festive possibilities by threatening to kill Wilmore for falsity, in the process unmasking Wilmore's character and sexual history to Helena disguised as a boy. This extract opens just after Helena, still disguised as a boy, has subsequently and successfully negotiated her own marriage with Wilmore. Florinda and Belle will have been married, and Pedro has forgiven them. The final part of the act falls into three sections here. The first focusing on the encounter between Pedro and Helena and Wilmore, which approximates lines 497 to 539 of the play, of the scene as it were, The second on Blunt, which approximates lines 540 to 558. And the third, the final of Promised Wedding and Feast, which approximates lines 559 to 573. Let us examine each part in turn before commenting on the choreography, as it were, of the relationship between the parts. The main party have just entered before this extract begins, and with Helena cross-dressed, her physical separation from the others in the previous scenes of Act 5, as well as her distinctive dress, continue to signify her transgressive and independent agenda. The opening altercation here is an important visual and narrative paradigm of many of the themes of the play. Helena introduces the metaphor which runs throughout this extract, both verbally and visually, that of love as war. We can read this in two ways, and much of what we read will depend on the actor who delivers the lines. The first is that she is acquiescing to, even condoning, the patriarchal arrangement whereby women are pawns in a strategic game between men, and passed between fathers or brothers and husbands. The second way to read it is in the context of her situation. She is cross dressed, has pursued her man and arranged the marriage herself, and that she herself directs the man's actions. Her use of conventional language draws our attention both to her understanding and to her simultaneous manipulation of the conventions which govern her life and others' views of her behavior, a Helena we recognize from the rest of the play. The language of war and violent acquisition is then replicated in Pedro's first action, emphasized by the stage direction, where he goes roughly to Helena, a violence echoing violence against women earlier in the play. This significantly tells the audience that Pedro has not been changed, or he has not changed himself or moved by the play's action. Pedro refers to Helena as the spoils of a noble family, unquote, suggesting she is a trophy to be won in battle. Wilmore also naturally uses the language of war in describing his actions. His sword, which does him right, is defending the cause of a woman. So, whilst Helena appears to use such language self-consciously, Pedro and Wilmore reduce sex and women to battlefield actions. This draws attention to a gender divide, both in linguistic usage and in attitudes to sex and marriage, and to potential future conflict between Helena and Wilmore. In this first section, Pedro's character is further demonized by his continued assertion of his role as a representative of his father and of paternal rule and order. For example, he interrogates the others, asking a set of 5 questions, the first 2 and the last one to Helena, and the 2 other addressed to Belleville, his newly acquired brother and Wilmore's friend. His questions to Helena accuse her of falsity, perfidy, deception, and even debauchery, and are all delivered in a patronizing tone and manner. His refusal to see Helena as an equal can be seen in his assumption that he should speak to men about the larger issues than her moral behavior. In his linguistic construction of her as a chattel and in his tonal delivery. His questions to Belleville are equally revealing. The first laments the loss of family wealth to an adventurer, suggesting a mutual responsibility amongst the men for wealth and assets of the family, including the women. The second question, which is, what's this to with the maintenance of a woman of her birth and quality, suggests Helena's economic and social position is his main responsibility and concern. Status, business arrangements between men, question of male honor, and the maintenance of wealth dominate his language and attitude to marriage. Pedro's language continues to cause the audience a sense of discomfort. His first 2 statements further betray a disturbing misogyny. His first is to Valeria, whom he also blames, and he hopes that her husband will revenge my quarrel to you, unquote, albeit said in a joking tone. His final statement both echoes this misogyny and reminds us of his role as a surrogate patriarch, where he says, "Sooner than a woman's will, therefore I forgive you all, and wish you may get my father's pardon as easily, which I fear." He acquiesces in the marriage only because it is impossible to change a woman's will, and then reminds us that the father is absent and is unlikely to approve. This signals further discord to come, which remains unresolved at the end of the play. Helena's language indicates her refusal to accept her brother's view of the world and her position in it, showing her as both proactive and able to manipulate situations. Her self-confidence and autonomy are clearly signaled in her 3 responses to her brother. The first, defense of herself, when she says, "My business is the same with all living creatures of my age," utilizes the language of natural equality in an appeal to the audience's view of equity. She alone refers to love as a determining factor in marriage, in contrast to her brother's and Wilmore's military language. A second, shorter defense argues that religious conviction is her own business, positing a private space for belief and moral accounting. Her third defense shows an escalation of her outspoken autonomy and even an explicit articulation of an understanding of the economics of marriage, where she says, "The 300,000 crowns my uncle left me and you cannot keep from me will be better laid out in love than in religion." She thus opens a gap between paternal approval and economic self-determination in marriage arrangements. This suggests to the audience that women of independent means and sufficient strength of character alone have the means for self-determination in marriage and even in other life matters. Helena is thus freed, but indirectly she acknowledges that women without money will be dependent upon the men in their families. The message here is therefore simultaneously optimistic for Helena and bleak for most other women. This section of the extract closes on Pedro's ominous statement that he does not believe his father's approval will be forthcoming, and is interrupted by what at first sight appears to be a comic episode. Blunt's entrance, extravagantly dressed in Spanish clothes. Sandwiched as it is between the confrontation we have just observed and the final call to music, marriage and feast, this interlude looks simply like a device to bring Blunt into the stage for a few final laughs. Yet, if we examine the content of these 20 lines, we can gauge a different purpose. Blunt enters still in the process of being dressed, as the stage direction makes clear. We recall that he lost all his clothes in Act 4 and has appeared at the beginning of Act 5 dressed only in an underwear. To cap these previous ritual humiliations, he is now dressed in the fashionable gear of a Spaniard, a nation he proclaims to hate, but who are the conquerors of the occupied Naples in the play. Blunt, the near rapist, is thus emblematically dressed in the outfit of invaders. Blunt's Anglophilia is a marked aspect of his character at the earlier points of the play, and represented as a narrow puritanical and hypocritical nationalism in contrast to the cosmopolitan and European identities of all the other main characters. Blunt is therefore visually ridiculed and shamed, as well as condemned by this change of dress. Furthermore, it is clear that the other men wear their clothes comfortably and change them as the need arises. By contrast, Blunt, as his name suggests significantly, is neither subtle nor flexible, and the disguises and shifting identities, which are so much a part of Wilmore's character and a defining feature of the Cavalier, are the precise opposite of Blunt. His entry now in this guise has several effects. It reminds us of both the parallels and contrasts between Blunt and Wilmore and Belleville. Blunt's blind folly in taking the blandishments of a prostitute for the love of a worldly woman was the dupe's version of Wilmore's and Belleville's own pursuit of women during Carnival. His fury at the duping quickly converting to a universal and violent misogyny, the culmination of which is the imprisonment and threatened rape of Florinda at the end of Act 4. Yet, as we see at the beginning of Act 5, this misogyny is shared by all the men in the play. For all jostle to possess the woman Blunt has captured, believing her to be a woman of the streets. Blunt's character is therefore used by Behn to hint at the dark and violent side of apparently civilized phase of masculine courtship. Such shadowing is clear in what Blunt says and does in this short episode, when his words to Helena appear to be overly familiar. He uses the report of her as a gypsy, my little Rover, quote unquote, to imply she might be interested in him sexually, a pox on my Spanish habit, quote unquote. Blunt, it seems, has been changed by his carnival's experiences, but only to the extent that he now appears to see all women as fair sexual games. This does not mesh comfortably with the posited happy ending of the comedy, in which all couples are matched in love and the future is represented as unthreatening. It is in this context of two episodes suggesting problems for the future that the swift finale of the comedy is acted out. Although a wedding, music and feast are proposed, we do not watch them, only a masked dance as a prelude for further celebrations. Blunt remains outside these lawful celebrations, giving voice to his dislocation by wondering whether the doxy who conned him might be behind one of those masks. Helena and Wilmore still remain unmarried during the action of the play. As the characters move to go inside, Helena and Wilmore's final conversation ends the play suitably enough by re-invoking the military metaphors of the first part of this extract. Once again, it is Helena who introduces this metaphor, which occurs in line 569, by comparing her feelings prior to marriage to his before a battle or tempest. This then feeds into Wilmore's rhyming couplet, which closes the play. The last word of the play is bed, an explicit acknowledgement of the play's sexual frankness. Yet that word, which should connote celebration, warmth and domesticity, is complicated by the metaphors Wilmore uses. And I quote, "No other dangers they can dread who venture in the storms of the marriage bed," unquote. Where the echoing bed dread resounds as a counterpoint to the plot's apparently happy closures. The final metaphoric image is of marriage as perilous, storm-driven and beset with danger. An ostensibly happy and conventional comic ending is shadowed by Wilmore's metaphors, echoing the other loose ends and discomfort in the first two parts of this extract, which forms the concluding drift of this play. Thank you.